I mean, I gave it a real hearty something. He said, I'm not doing that. So anyway, so that's what I got from him. So he might have actually won something. I don't know. He didn't say one way or the other. But that being said, we're in the book of Romans, Romans chapter 3. And we're starting in verse 13, actually. And I don't know how far we're going to get. We'll see. The book of Romans is a doctrinal book. It's very heavy doctrine. But that kind of changes. What chapter does that change in? Does anybody remember?
Chapter 12?
Yeah, right around chapter 12. And there's a switch. And we go from heavy doctrine to very practical Christian living. But right now we're still in heavy doctrine. If you remember, chapter 3 has to do with the guilt of the whole world before God. And he begins by establishing early in the chapter that God is true. No matter what man may think or what man may say, God is true. And then he begins to explain that the whole world is guilty before God. And that kind of starts, really, that particular thought begins in verse 9. And it runs all the way down to the end of verse 20. But we're going to pick up in verse 13. So I'm going to pray, and then we're going to read verses 13 and 14 and get into our study. Lord, thank you for your word. As we continue to study through Romans, Lord, I pray that you'd encourage our hearts and help us to, Lord, Romans is a deep book. All of your word is deep. And if we look hard enough, we can see that there's layers beyond anywhere where we've ever learned. But now as we study, Lord, help us to just glean more from Romans, that we may learn more about you and your character and who you are. We thank and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So we stopped last week in verse 13. And I want to back up and look at verse 10 and 11 real quick and remind you that the first thing Paul does is he explains to us that man is corrupted in his wisdom, in his thoughts. And then after that, he, in verse 12, talks about the corruption in our works. So we've got corrupted wisdom, we've got corrupted works, and now as we get to verses 13 and 14, we have corrupted what? Words, corrupted words. All right? So it says this: their throat is an open sepulcher, with their tongues they have used deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. You know, remember what I was saying about how Paul is going back to the Old Testament. He's pulling out Old Testament verses, and he's just doing basically verse by verse by verse. Sometimes he kind of quotes it, you know, pretty verbatim. Sometimes he just kind of sums it up a little bit. But here, he's going back to a couple of verses, Psalm 140, verse 3, and then Psalm 10, verse 7. So let me start over here. And Allie, you look up Psalm 140, verse 3. And then Kenny, you look at Psalm 10 and verse 7. And I want you to be thinking, remember what we just read in Romans 3, 13 and 14. And then just listen to these two verses. All right, Psalm 140, verse 3.
They have sharpened their tongues like a serpent, adder's poison is under their lips.
And then Psalm 10, 7.
His mouth is full of cursing and deceit, and fraud under his tongue is mischief and vanity.
All right, so verse 13 is Psalm 140, verse 3. And then verse 14 is Psalm 10, verse 7. So far, this is what Paul has done. He's taken verse after verse and just kind of laid it out for us. His main point is that the whole world, whether you're Jew or you're Gentile, you stand guilty before God. And in these two verses, Paul points to that one part of the body that cannot be tamed. Notice that I did not say it cannot be controlled. I said it cannot be tamed. There is a difference, right? How do you control a wild animal? Do you tame it? No, because it's a wild animal. You cannot tame a wild animal. It's wild. If it was tamed, it would be domestic. So what do? You control it by caging it, right? And I think a lot of us could do better if we could keep our tongues caged too. The mouth is an open sepulcher. Think about that. If you've ever seen anything like that, you know that there is a smell of rottenness and decay. And so it can be that way with our words. Deceit is more the norm than the exception nowadays, sadly enough. The tongue has a great ability to be like, as he describes here, like a snake, like arrows. The tongue has the ability to poison others with biting words. That's what a serpent does. You can think of false doctrine or gossip or hatred or maliciousness or backbiting, that sort of thing, and it's a deadly poison. And the thing is, sometimes we think that we can say things and just move on with life. It doesn't work like that. People get hurt, and it lasts. As Christians, we like to say, well, we ought to be able to forgive other people, okay, so so I said his baby is ugly. He should be able to forgive me for that. But sometimes it's not quite that simple. It should be. I agree with you. People ought to be able to do that. But that's just not reality. That's not the world we live in. The world we live in is that sometimes we say things and we hurt people and they don't get over it, or they say things and they hurt us, and we don't get over it, even though we know we should. I'm not saying that that's the way it ought to be. I'm saying that that's the way it is. All right, let's keep that in mind. James chapter 3 verses 8 through 10. And Chie, why don't you read those? James chapter 3 verses 8 through 10. Similitude.
Out of the same mouth proceeded blessing and cursing, my brethren. These things are not spoken.
So we know the power of the tongue. In just a few spoken words, we can destroy a lifetime of good reputation. I want you to think of someone that you have, maybe you've known them for a long time, or they've lived a long time, and they had an exemplary testimony. And then somebody comes along to you in just a few moments, they tell you something damaging about that person, and it really hurts their reputation. In my mind, sometimes I just wish that people would not tell me things. I don't want to know about the dark side of some guy who maybe their sermons have been a blessing to me, or maybe their testimony has been a blessing to me. And then I don't like it when somebody comes along and says, "Oh, let me tell you something about this guy," and then they give me some irrefutable evidence of how they did something wrong, and then that's what's in my mind after that. And I don't like that. And I don't think that's the way we ought to be. The power of the tongue. And here's a real painful part about all of this. The tongue is merely an outward expression of what is going on in our hearts. So if you are the kind of person that you are backbiting someone else, or making malicious comments, or snide little side things, or even just come right out and saying something mean and nasty to somebody, guess where that comes from? Well, I'll tell you where it came from. It came from the fact that they did this, or they said that, or whatever, and I'm just trying to get even. Well, no, that you're missing the whole point. This comes from the heart. The reason why Paul brings this up is because he's talking about the heart. Matthew chapter 15, verses 17 through 20. And Brother Cole, can you read those for us?
Do not ye yet understand that whatsoever enters into the mouth goes into the belly and is cast out into the ground? But those things which proceed out of the mouth come forth from the heart, and they defile men. For out of the heart proceedeth evil thoughts, murder, adultery, fornication, theft, false witness, blasphemy. These are the things which defile a man, but to keep one mind defile the mind.
I love the context here, because I wish I would have known the Bible better when I was growing up, but my home wasn't a Christian home, so I didn't know it. But the disciples were in trouble because they were eating without washing their hands. I would have loved to have known that, so I could have gone to my mom and said, "Mom, Jesus' disciples ate without washing their hands. Why can't I?" But the thing is, Jesus uses this as a teaching moment, and he explains to his disciples that it's not that which goes in which defiles us, it's that which comes out of us that defiles us. Why? Because It comes from the heart. Verse 19, for out of the heart proceedeth evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witnesses, blasphemy. These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands defileth not a man. So what is Paul doing here? He's given us corrupted wisdom, corrupted works, corrupted words. I wish, I don't know how you feel about this, but sometimes I wish that I could just do what I know, because I know to keep my mouth shut sometimes. And I wish that I would do it, but sometimes I don't. And I think that's true for all of us. But wouldn't it be nice if you could just not say something that you have to apologize for later? It would be nice if I could learn to keep my mouth shut sometimes, but I'm not that kind of guy. I have to get away from the issue in order not to say something stupid. But whatever it takes is what we do, right? So we get to verse 15 through 17, and we've got corrupted wisdom, corrupted works, corrupted words. And now we come to 15 through 17, where we have corrupted ways, all right? Romans 3, 15 through 17, it says this, their feet are swift to shed blood, destruction and misery are in their ways, and the way of peace have they not known. So we've gotten 3 more verses here, and in these 3 verses, we find out that man's, not only is his wisdom corrupt, not only is his works corrupt, the things which he does, but also his ways. His ways are corrupt. Proverbs 1:16. Brother Duke, can you read that? Proverbs 1:16. And I want you to notice the similarity between Romans 3:15 and then Proverbs 1:16. Notice the similarity here. All right, in Romans 3:15, their feet are swift to shed blood. Very clearly, this is in Paul's mind when he's writing this. All right, the feet are swift to shed blood. What does that mean? Well, we know what it means. It doesn't really require an explanation. We're living in that kind of time. We're living in a very violent time. And, you know, when you read the news, it's shocking, but it's getting to where it's no longer shocking. We expect that now when we read the news, that we're going to see somebody has gone into a store or something and shot up a bunch of people. We expect to see that now. It happens weekly. We expect to see that somebody has burned down a building or looted something because they were angry about some decision that somebody made. We expect to see that because we've seen it in the news so often in the course of the last couple of years. We expect to see it. We know that we're living in a very violent time. And it's not shocking to read the news of bloody violence that's happening around us anymore. And then you add to this the untold millions who are murdered every year by abortion. We are living in a very violent, bloody time. People are swift to shed blood. It's easy to see why God describes the corrupted ways of man in such vivid language, because that's what we are as mankind. That's what we are. Look at Romans 3:16 now. It says, destruction and misery are in their ways. Destruction and misery are in their ways. And again, stories abound of completely unprovoked attacks. Have you seen any of these news articles where some little old lady is, walking down the sidewalk, and then out of nowhere, some young punk comes up and just beats her up, unprovoked, and then runs off? It happens a lot. They caught one guy in Korea, and they asked him why he did it. And he said, because I was angry. About what? And what did that poor little old lady have to do with anything? Nothing. Or, these acid attacks where somebody just takes acid and throws it into the face of somebody. And why? Because they're mad because, that was my ex-girlfriend and she broke up with me. Or, that was my ex-boyfriend and now he's dating some other girl. Or, and they've got some reason why they want to permanently, forever disfigure you. That is incredibly violent. In my day, you know what we did? We said, I don't like you anymore. Get away from me. Well, we're not living in my day anymore, are we? We're living in an extremely violent time, and unprovoked attacks leaving innocent people wounded or frightened, sometimes even dead. Lives are lost, and destruction lies in their path. Destruction and misery are in their ways. This is a description of man. Look at verse 17, Romans 3:17. And the way of peace have they not known. Now, I want us to go to Isaiah chapter 59, verses 7 and 8. And Isaiah 59, verses 7 and 8. And I want you to read that. And then I want you to also think of Romans 3:16 and 17 at the same time, all right? So Isaiah 59, verses 7 and 8. And Brother Kerry, why don't you read those when you get there?
Their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed innocent blood. Their thoughts are thoughts of iniquity, wasting and destruction are in their paths. The way of peace they know not. The way of peace they know not, and there is no judgment in their goings. And they have made them crooked paths. Who shall go therein shall not know peace.
So in Romans 3:16, it says destruction and misery are in their ways. And when you read in Isaiah 59, verse 7 and 8, you read that. And the way of peace have they not known from verse 17. Isaiah 59, verses 7 and 8. Again, you can see that very clearly in these verses. And very clearly, this is what Paul is referring to. So Romans 3:16 and 17 are most likely Paul's summation or paraphrase, if you will, if you want to put it that way, from Isaiah 59, verses 7 and 8. All the way through, as Paul is establishing the corrupt nature of man, how has he done this? He goes back to the Bible, and he gives verse after verse after verse after verse after verse. And he's stringing together a list of Bible verses on the corrupt nature of man. And we should expect that corrupted man would not know the way of peace. Why? There is no peace, saith my God, to the wicked. I think that's Isaiah 57:20. That's what God's word says. So if you live a wicked life, you're not going to have peace. You certainly don't have peace with God, and probably not going to have peace in the world. The way of peace you'll not know. There is a prevalent fighting spirit that is predominant in society today. When I went to visit my daughter a few years back, we decided that we were going to go to New York City, and I think they wanted to go to Koreatown or go see something or something. Anyway, if you've ever been, how many of you have been to New York City? You've driven in New York City, a car. Yeah, you're smarter than me. Okay, how many of you have been to New York City? Okay, so you took public transportation. You're smarter than I am. I drove. Now, when you go to New York City and you're driving, you've got to park somewhere, and you can't park anywhere. Everywhere is illegal to park, except if you want to park underground and pay like $20 an hour, some, in crazy price like that, which, I live in Korea, and you don't pay for parking in Korea. You just find a place around the block or something. And so I'm driving around and around trying to find a place to park. I finally found a place to park. And so we pull into this place and we're getting out, and I've been searching and driving in New York City traffic about 5 minutes, and you're mad. You're ready to shoot somebody. It's that bad. I finally found a place to park, and I pull over to park. I park and I get out, and when I get out, the store owner there, he yells at me and he says, hey, you can't park there. And I turn around and I said, why? Because I'm mad, because I've been looking for parking. Right? I'm ready to fight. And I said, why? He goes, well, it's illegal parking. If you park there, surely you are going to get a ticket that costs more than $20. You don't want to do this, sir. He didn't want to fight. He was trying to be a nice guy to some poor white guy in the neighborhood that didn't know where to park. But I was so used to people being so caustic that I thought he wanted to fight. So I'm ready. Right? I'm going right along with the flow. I'm fitting right into society. Why? Because I'm just as corrupt as everybody else. The fighting spirit of man. That's what we do.
Whoa.
We have got to keep our old nature under wraps, because at any given moment, he's going to make you look foolish. Sir.
You moved.
Oh, yeah, I moved. I moved. Yes, I did. I ended up parking. I could have done that a whole lot earlier and just paid the money and not been frustrated. But, you know, that's not the way my mind works. Anyway, so there's a prevailing fighting spirit that's predominant in society today. Rather than seek peace or come up with some kind of organized or peaceful conclusion to problems, we're being told that brute force is the answer. I was a military brat. Does everybody know what a military brat is? Does anybody know what a military brat is? It means that my dad was in the Army, or he was in the military, and we moved a lot. And we didn't stop moving until I was in the end of 6th grade. I went to 7th grade, from 7th grade through high school in Virginia, finally settled down in one place. Until then, we moved a lot. I think I counted one time 26 schools. 26 schools in my first 6 years. 26 schools. You say, how does that work? Surely you didn't move 26 times. No, but what happens is, like my dad got stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, and we lived in 2 different places off of the installation before we moved on to the installation. So I ended up going to 4 different schools just in that 1 3-year period, okay? So we added it all up. We came up to 26 different schools that I had gone to. That's incredible. And I found out that when you get to a new school, typically you're a military brat, you arrive in the middle of the year. You're either light years ahead of all these other people who didn't study what you did, or you're way behind and you got to catch up. It's a nightmare. And you move, and that's not the hard part. You go in, and the first class you go into, there's always that one guy who walks up to you and he says, "What are you looking at?" To which, after a few years, I figured out the proper response was to say, "Obviously not much." And then you get up and swing first, because it's going to come. They're going to do it. It's going to be a fight no matter what. That's the whole purpose of their approaching you, is to hit you and show you your place in society, right? So what do? You end up fighting back. You kind of go with the flow. The smart thing would be to just like turn away or get up and walk away or get away from this guy because he's an idiot. And after all, once you grow up, you know, us nerds, we run the world now, right? Guys like that are in prison or, you know, picking up trash or something somewhere. The jerks, you know, they're not doing anything. It's the nerds that run the world. So we don't learn that lesson. Instead, what do? We want to prove how macho we are, and we fight. That's what guys do. Girls do it a little bit different. They fight in different ways, but they still fight. Why? That's the character of man. We are not peaceful people. Without Christ, there is no peace, saith my God, to the wicked. All right? So that's the character of man. Brute force is the answer. That's what we're taught. That's what we're told. Nobody comes right out and says, brute force is the answer. That's how you're going to get by in this world. You're going to get by crushing the other guy. We don't say that. We just do that. Right? Let's move on to the next point. Corrupted worship. Romans 3:18. Corrupted worship. There is no fear of God before their eyes. A good accompanying thought to this, or a good cross-reference to that, could be in Psalm 36. Psalm 36 and verse 1. And it says, the transgression of the wicked saith within my heart that there is no fear of God before his eyes. Paul's done it again. He hasn't quoted the whole Bible verse. He's gone back to that one phrase, and he's grabbed that one phrase that proves his point, and he has gone verse after verse after verse after verse, from verse 10 all the way down here now to verse 17 and 18, verse after verse after verse, showing us how bad we are. He didn't build a doctrine based upon one phrase in one verse. No, sir. He has taken the word of God and shown very clearly what man without Christ is. This is what we are. So you can go all the way back to verse 10 where he says, as it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. And just in case you've got any questions about that, let me give you about 10 more Bible verses that prove that. This is his line of attack on this doctrine. So, you know, and I have no doubt that Paul probably was thinking about Psalm 36, verse 1 when he wrote this. And so there it is. So what's the expressed truth here? I said corrupted worship. Corrupted worship. Rather, let me say it this way. There's no worship at all here. There is no fear of God before their eyes. There's no respect of God, no fear of God, no desire for God. This is what man has come to. I just recently read some statistics just the other day. Does anybody know what the current statistics are for Christianity in Korea? I understand that the people that do statistics, they count everybody. They count Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and Catholics and everybody all under Christianity, right? Well, what do you think it is?
21.
21%? Any other guesses? It's in the teens now. Yeah, it was 26% about 10 years ago. Now we're down to the teens. And those who have not, they have no religion at all. It's over 50%. I think it's like 51 and something percent. That's incredible. Unbelievable. In other words, every other person that you meet outside of church, you're walking down the street, you can meet somebody and you can say to them, do you believe in God? 1 out of every 2 are going to look at you and say, I don't know, I haven't thought about it, I haven't given much thought to God, I don't know. It's not that they're atheists, it's that they don't have time for God. There's no thought of God in their minds. There is no fear of God before their eyes. It's like the days of Noah. What did the Bible say? That they'll be eating and drinking, they'll be getting married, given in marriage, and then the flood comes. In other words, life goes on. Nobody's concerned about God at all. We're living in that day. We would love to go back to 100 years ago where, you know, when you had a church and you could build it up and you had thousands of people coming in and the gospel was really getting preached and you had, you know, guys like, well, this is a little over 100 years ago, but guys like D.L. Moody or Billy Sunday or people like that, they're preaching and thousands are there and thousands are getting saved and, you know, bars are closing up. And Billy Sunday, by the way, does anybody know who Billy Sunday was? Billy Sunday, what do we know about him? Baseball player. What else do we know?
He loved to burn.
He what?
He loved to burn.
He loved to what?
Burn.
He loved to burn?
Yeah, he said people like to come see me because they like to watch me burn.
Oh, I see. What else do we know? He was an evangelist, a baseball player, what? He was a preacher. He was the kind of guy that you loved or hated because he was very flamboyant in his preaching. He didn't have any problems at all getting real, you know, agitated or what's animated. There's a word, animated, and you know, he'd jump up on the pulpit if he had room between the pulpit and the ceiling and do all kinds of crazy things. And a lot of people went to see him just for the show. But he preached the gospel hard, he preached it straight, and he preached so hard against alcohol. Do you know what happened in America? Woman suffrage? No.
That was him and him, though.
Yeah. What was it? Yeah. We had a period in America called the Prohibition period where alcohol was illegal. Of course, it's always underground, and we get that. It's the same thing with drugs and everything else. But the fact is it was illegal in America for a long time. All right? And why? A lot of that is attributed, a lot of the influence for that is attributed to Billy Sunday. So don't tell me one guy can't make a difference. Clearly, one guy made a big difference. All right? And of course, it was reversed later for, you know, lots of other reasons. But he was personally responsible for that. And as a result of that, literally, bars and saloons and red light districts in town were closing up, getting cleaned up, and people were turning to God. And we would love to go back to those days. I would love to live back in those days. But we don't. We don't. We live in 2021. And we are seeing the fruits of the sinful character of man without the controls of morality or religion on our society. When you remove that, every man does that which is right in his own eyes, and we see what we see today. That's what we have today. That's the mess that we have. It's one thing for those who are involved in false religion, you know, such as the Buddhists or Confucianists or whatever, you know, that they would not have enough knowledge of God to know that they should fear him. They don't have an idea of who God really is. So there's, you know, really a twisted thinking in their mind concerning God or considering the fear of God. But in our society, for you and I, there is a general knowledge of God that we grow up with. I mean, I grew up in an unchurched home. There was no God in my house. You know, we didn't talk about God. We prayed before we ate. That was our religious instruction. We prayed before we ate. Everybody sat down at the table, hold your hands and close your eyes. Somebody would get called on to pray, and we would pray. God is great. God is good. Let us thank him for our food. Amen. That was it. That was my spiritual instruction for the most part growing up. Every now and then we'd have a religious fit. My mom liked to read from the book of Revelation and scare me half to death, but that's a different story for a different time. But I had no religious instruction, so you can look at that and you can say that how do you develop a knowledge of the gospel and a knowledge of God when you got no religious instruction in the home? Because in our society, while I was growing up, that was out there every day, all day. You saw it everywhere. I knew before I was 18, though I had never been taught this in my home, I knew who God was. I knew Jesus was his son. I knew he died for my sins. I knew I was a sinner. I knew that the Bible was God's holy word, and I could believe it and trust it. The good parts and the bad parts, which I didn't like so much, I had a good foundation just from growing up in that kind of society. We don't have that anymore. That's been stripped away from us. It's gone. What we're living with and looking at today is the result of removing morality and religion from our culture and man getting his own way. It's already happened in America. It's going to happen in Korea. We'll see Korea going the same way in the next 20 years. Mark it down. I said it. It's going to be live on YouTube. You can go back in 20 years and listen to it and see, I'm right. I know I'm right. It's coming. All right? And the only way to stop it is to teach the scriptures. It's the only way. It's one thing to know about God, but in our society, we don't have any excuse. We know he sent his son to die for us and that he's someday going to judge us. We know that. And I don't think that there was ever a time in my life that I didn't have at least a basic understanding of God. But here we find that man has come so corrupt that even though he knows who God is, he does not fear him, even though he knows who God is. Now, let me give you an illustration, all right? Put my mask on. Here's an illustration. Let's walk down here. Good preaching. How come they didn't jump out of their chairs in fear? Huh? They know I'm not actually going to hurt them. I've shown by my character, I don't think I've ever... Well, I have hit Chie when she was younger. It didn't work, but I tried. Tried to fix it. It's broke forever. But God is not respected in our society anymore because we don't know or don't believe that he's actually going to do the things he says he's going to do. We don't believe that anymore. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Romans 1:32. Who knowing the judgment of God, it's not that they don't know, they know. Who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, same, but have pleasure in. What do we call this? rebellion. Pure, straight rebellion. They know about God, but they do not respect him enough to actually as they should. So that takes us up to verses 19 and 20, that the law condemns all, and we'll stop here today. Any questions?
We studied the YouTube, and then one of the candidates to the president in Korea to his sister-in-law and his brother, older brother, discussing and that kind of debate, and people just listen that kind of quoted and everybody. So I start to keep doing his adaptation, and also his brother doing his feminism. Like, because his brother becomes president, how nice, but he does not want to how the tongue makes someone them much better.
Yeah. Yeah. I like having the internet because there's a lot of resources out there that you can just about any book that's ever been written is out there. And you can find it and you can read it, most often free online. There's so much information out there, but the bad side to that is that there's so much bad stuff too. And, you know, I like to read the news. I'm kind of a news junkie, but I'm very careful. I don't like to read all of the, you know, the garbage. So I have like a news aggregator, and I have it set to just give me interesting stuff, you know, and I don't get a lot